So about tonight, well, it's going to be about open innovation, about connecting startup with corporation. And with us tonight, we're very lucky to have Felipe Monteiro, Professor Felipe Monteiro. So Felipe fly especially from Fontainebleau. Actually arrived this morning, so please be kind. And so Felipe is a professor of strategy at INSEAD. He's also the director of the Global Talent Competitiveness Index. I think we still have some report left. If you're interested, please come and see me at the end of the session. I will be happy to give away a few of the reports. Professor Felipe Monteiro is a professor of strategy, and he's also a multi-award winning professor. He joined INSEAD in 2014, and before that, he was with Wharton and received many awards for excellence in teaching. So you're very, very lucky to have him tonight. And well, I think, Felipe, the stage is yours now.
Thank you. Thank you, Pascal. Thank you. Pascal now raised expectations at the time. This is old times, right? I don't get many awards. I'm kidding. So, thank you so much. Thanks for, after a long day, sparing some time to have a conversation here. So the way I'm planning to do, is kind of, let's have a conversation. So feel free to interrupt me at any point. I am a typical INSEAD profile. For those of you, how many of you are alumni? So you remember those old days at school? This kind of very mixed type of people. So I'm Brazilian. I'm married to an Argentinian woman. My kids were born in the UK, and now we live in France. And right, so you can see the mess. Got 4 languages, everybody with a different accent, nobody understanding each other, and that's how we live. At the same time, I'm talking today about this idea of boundary spanning, which is how do you cross boundaries. I'm convinced this is such an important skill, and it's such an important activity that we should have in organizations. That I think this background that many of you also have, it's, how do you live in different cultures and how do you manage to cross those boundaries is really important. Let me start, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir, you already know this, but let me at least remind us of certain important topics. So Pascal was saying, the topic of tonight is open innovation and how corporates can work with startups. And just before I tell you how I believe they can and how they can do better, let me try to share with you how I see why you should care about it. I think the first reason is many times solutions, right, are already there, and many times the solutions that the well-established organizations don't have, many startups may have them, okay? So if you're looking for something new, many times you won't find in the very well-established, resource-rich companies. This many times is going to be from small companies. Also, many times what you need is not an entirely new solution. What you need is another component that mix with what you have. That combination is new. So many times what large corporations will try to get from the startups is not the full solution, but it's another component that they miss. And I think for me, the third element here is the idea that many times engaging with startups, more than anything, it challenges your existing dominant logic. It challenges the way you see things, okay? So I'm saying this in 30 seconds or 1 minute. I just like to make a remark. There's a lot of research backing up what I'm saying, okay? So we could go on and on each of those topics. But to me, maybe I can also give you some examples of how this is relevant. Any of you working in pharma companies or has worked in pharma companies before? No pharma here? Have you heard about the idea of patent cliffs? Have you heard about patent cliffs? What is a patent cliff? No? Yeah. How big of a problem is this for the pharma companies? Very big. It becomes a generic drug. Anyone can produce it. Exactly, right? Is a graph. showing you that patent cliff, that what it means is it's such a big cliff. Pharma companies are losing billions a year with patents that expire. Then everybody can produce a generic without paying for the patent. And what's the connection with this, with the topic about corporate and startups, is what pharma companies need is a lot of new innovation, okay? To compensate for the patents which are expiring. And where do you think those new ideas and new compounds and new drugs are coming from? A lot of them are not coming from their own R&D labs. So I have done some work. You know Merck, the big pharma, right, based in the US? I have done a lot of work with Merck when I was at Wharton. And I've always remembered this data, which I think there are two interesting things there. One is to see that basically, okay, 2/3 of the new drugs are coming from not from their own R&D labs. Okay, so you take a very rich, resourceful company like Merck, and very R&D intensive, and even those cases, a lot of what they produce eventually, what they launch, is not coming from their own knowledge. It's coming from the startups. And what is interesting there is it looks like that the computer somehow is kind of closing my pictures. And there are a lot of pictures, so we need to find a solution so the pictures come back. But back to the story there. Where I was going was, you see the cliff? And now you see the billions? So they were there. Thank you. And then I think the next picture I was going to show you is this one, which you might look and say, this is a mistake. It was my daughter, just before I left Fontainebleau, she put a picture of a lollipop. And you know what's special about this lollipop? It turns around, right? Do you know that story? So the story is the following. A crazy scientist goes to Procter & Gamble. Do you know Procter & Gamble? The guy knocks on the door of Procter & Gamble and says, you know, I created a very small engine that if you press a button, the lollipop turns around. Okay? Scientists are crazy people. They come up with the most different things. If you are Procter & Gamble, what do you tell the scientist? Says what? Sell? Yeah. Sell to whom?
No, so?
So what, right? So, yeah, nice. Is Procter & Gamble in the business of selling lollipops? No. So what do you do? What's that? Introduce, maybe, right? You can be a broker. So let me see if I can help someone else. Maybe not, right? Knock on the door of, I don't know, Kraft or anyone.
Maybe see if they can use it into other products.
Such as? Toothbrush, right? So I think the story here, right, in addition to the legend of the lollipop with open innovation, right, becoming the toothbrush, is to remind us that a lot of, I was making the point of how important it is for large corporates to work with other firms, right, the startups, and I think this example also reminds us that many times the solutions will come from completely different industries. And the value added that a company like Procter & Gamble can do here is you put your brand, right? And then you have the ability, right, of mass marketing this globally. But if you had, I think the people at Procter & Gamble had a very narrow mind at that point. They'll say, no, let's not do anything, or right, let's sell. So it's interesting how it pushed Procter & Gamble to go. And pushed so far that Procter & Gamble was, right, one of the pioneers when it comes to open innovation, right, with this idea. They even change their research and development, right? Instead of R&D, they start calling it connect and develop. If you go to the website, you see what they're trying to do there. I think the puzzle I had in mind was, you know, it is clear, I mean, it seems that we have a lot of arguments saying how important it is for large corporations to work with those startups. I think it's also clear that a lot of those opportunities are there. what puzzled me was why it's so difficult to do it, okay? And why so many companies and so many, as rich as they can be, right? You can talk about companies which have a lot of resources. What prevents those things to work? So I spent basically the last 10 years going back and forth to Silicon Valley and to other clusters, really to understand if I am a large corporation and I'm trying to connect with startups and I'm trying to bring those things inside, those new ideas inside and make them innovation. What are the challenges? And I'm calling this boundary spanning or boundary spanners project because what I will suggest to you later is that there are certain managers, there's a certain role that can play a very important kind of role in that process. Okay? There's certain type of people, there's certain processes that can really make a difference in how large corporations benefit or not from those ideas from outside. Are you with me? Okay. So I talked to a number of those companies, and you see a lot of them kind of European, very well established. It's kind of, do you have anyone from any of those companies here?
Sort of, like 6 years at AXA.
You spent 6 years at AXA. So I think the type of people that we were talking is, if you are AXA or if you are British Telecom or Johnson & Johnson, and you create an area to connect with startups, and you send people to Silicon Valley or send people to Boston or send people to Paris, to CCNF, okay? What are the challenges those people have, okay? When does it work and when it does not work? And we came up with 4 types of structures, okay? And you may like or dislike our names, but I think the first one is a lot of companies, when they try to connect with the startups or with those clusters, what they send is what we call in here the VIP sightseers. Okay? They send high-level people. They go to Silicon Valley. They go to Google. They take a picture with the statue, right, with the Android thing. They come back, but really, they are well connected internally, but they don't have much connectedness in that cluster. Okay, I mean, it's nice. You can go, you seek plug and play or whatever. Okay, but to what extent you manage to connect? I think we have another example here, which is sometimes some organizations, what they do is they look for people who like to go, and right, sometimes very young people say, yes, I would love to have, would you like to be responsible for accessing, connecting with startups in Abu Dhabi or Silicon Valley? People say, yes, okay, but they go there. They are neither well connected internally, nor well connected in the clusters, and we call them loners. And I think there's still a third category that we see as a problem, which is the reverse of that, which is sometimes you send people and they connect so much with the local environment, but then they disconnect with headquarters, okay? So they become, right, so it was Michael Offer who came up with this idea of castaways, right? People who are in a boat and they go to the island and they become, right, natives of that island. There's also a big risk of that, okay? Because you can be very close to that ecosystem, but lose the connections back home. So as you see here, where I'm going is to suggest that the critical challenge here is how can you be this effective broker? Meaning, how can you be very well connected in that cluster, but also how you should be very well connected internally. Which one do you think is more difficult? Internally, externally, what do you think? Both, yeah. It is difficult, right? So it is not, but what I will suggest to you later on is we tend to believe that the challenge of external innovation is external the vast majority of the time. The main challenges are internal, okay? And it's interesting because, right, it sounds a little bit paradoxical because they say, no, I have to be looking outside to find the solutions. I have to be looking outside to connect with startups. But it's exactly kind of that illusion that by accessing things from outside, things internally would happen, that a lot of those cases don't work. So we're suggesting here some kind of why it doesn't work. So many times, you have people who come back and forth. Many times you have problems with language and cultural barriers, et cetera, et cetera. Many times you have kind of problems back at headquarters. But what I like to emphasize is what I believe can happen, okay? I think on the one hand, a number of us are interested in how do you capture signals? How do you capture the new things going to happen? How do you connect and see in different parts of the world how new technologies are emerging? And it's important to have the radars, okay? And what could be type of radars? I don't know, you have a corporate venture fund, you have an incubator, an accelerator, you participate in different conferences, et cetera, et cetera. So you have those type of ways of scanning the environment. I think, as I was suggesting, where I see most companies failing is not how do they set up the radars, is why they don't take action, okay? And I will suggest two main mechanisms of why they don't take action, and we'll try to suggest also how can you overcome those two. It's dark, so we cannot see the beautiful Louvre Museum here in Abu Dhabi. But if you could see, how many of you, have you all been there? Right? Beautiful, all those masterpieces. Would you buy, even if you have the money, would you buy kind of a $5 million painting and give it to someone who don't understand that? Would you? Would you say, no, let's have one of the masterpieces of, what do they have now? The Dutch, right? It is the Rembrandt, right? Vermeer. For you to really appreciate the subtleties of what makes a masterpiece in art, it requires a level of knowledge and a level of ability to say why this is so different from that other painting. What this painter did that nobody else has done before. How sometimes very different details of things that those guys were so innovative at the time. And what I'm trying to suggest here is many times we don't do things or we don't act on things because we don't understand it, okay? You can be in front of a masterpiece. You can be in front of, let's say, a Mona Lisa before Mona Lisa became Mona Lisa, and you might not be able to recognize it, okay? It is a cognitive problem. It's something that, we don't know. Do you remember the former Secretary of State of Defense in the US, Don Rumsfeld, talk about the knowns, unknowns, and the known, all this story. Many times companies don't act on those opportunities because they don't understand it, okay? You don't even know what it means. I would like to suggest, though, this is just part of the problem. Many times, the problem is not that you don't understand. You understand it. But what you're seeing is not pleasant, okay? So many times, the lack of action has nothing to do with a cognitive problem. Many times, the lack of action has to do with you are exposed with external ideas that would challenge what you believe and would challenge, what the organization does. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is if you think that the problem is a cognitive problem, it is here, okay? It is not understanding how Mona Lisa is a masterpiece. What do? What is the remedy? Let's kind of put in technological terms. If you are in the telecommunication sector and you think that your company is not understanding certain new technologies, they don't understand it, what do? How can you remedy that? Sorry? You hire experts? Fill the gap in the knowledge, You try to train people, You bring knowledge to solve the problem. I think in the second one, you can bring as much knowledge as you want, okay? It will not solve because the issue is not cognitive. It's not about not understanding. It's about not agreeing. And if it is an issue of not agreeing, what do you need to do? Play the political game. Yes, part of that is. What else? Uh-huh. And so let's kind of pretend, okay, I am in Silicon Valley, and which company do you work for? Visa, right? So Visa, future of kind of credit cards and payments, right? And then I'm Silicon Valley, and I go to you and I ask you, what do you need? Okay, I'm here to help you. Tell me your pain points. What might be preventing you from telling me your pain points? You may be worried about, right? And that's a very good point, because a lot of that type of job many times has to be done by internal people, okay? Because the moment you review, if you say, let me hire, right, Professor Monteiro to find the solution for Visa, right? You may have to review what's your roadmap. So many times you don't want to review this to external partners. That's fair enough. But even if you do this internally, many times people will not articulate to you what's really preventing, okay? Because a lot of this time, what it takes is you really have to have a lot of trust, because by the moment you realize what you need, you also realize your weaknesses, right? You say, no, yes, we would like to do this, but we cannot do this, right? It would be great to have this new technology, I don't know, for mobile payments, but our legacy systems, if we do this, our boss will get crazy, okay? So I think the job of people, which I call, right, it's kind of boundary spenders, people who have this job of connecting very disconnected world, okay, which many times will be you are in a specific region or you're in a specific technology, and what you're trying to do is how do you link what you're seeing outside with the needs and the possibilities, right, the constraints that you have inside. I think the job of this type of people, I would summarize in kind of 4 types of jobs. And they go in order of complexity. Many times, okay, what you need is people who can just channel what's happening outside from to inside, okay? And I use this metaphor of saying, what they do is a channel, right? Okay, I am Silicon Valley, right? Or I am in Shanghai, I saw something, and I just relay that information, okay, to the rest of the organization. I think it helps, okay? And if it is very codified type of information, people can say, yes, I saw this fantastic Chinese firm, they're doing this completely different way, okay? But it is very limited, because many times, what you see, if you just try to channel, people don't understand it. And when I talk about translation here, I'm not talking about from English, right, to Arabic or Portuguese to Spanish. I'm talking about translation from, right, what is this ecosystem? What is the language of the startups versus the language of the large corporations? Many times, they speak very different language. So I believe that the job of a boundary spanner is not only being a channel, connecting worlds which are disconnected, right, and you channel, but a lot of what you have to do is spend a lot of time translating. Let me give one example. So I've been working, British Telecom, and I mean, for those of you how many of you will be tomorrow in the workshop, right? So we will have this conversation again, right? So I've been working for a long time with British Telecom, right? The largest, one of the largest telcos in Europe, right? The telco from the UK. And they say, when we went to Silicon Valley and we start seeing gaming, okay? When we came back to the UK and said, BT, we need to be doing something with gaming, the reaction that they got was, no, we're not in the gaming business. We are not, I don't know, Sony, we're not, okay, Microsoft, I don't know, but game is not for us. And it took them some time to understand that what they need to do is translate that gaming into something that BT understood, which was demand for very high broadband. Okay, so the moment they were able to say, what we're seeing here are some applications that will require a lot of broadband, those people are prepared to pay for that, then, yeah, broadband. That's what we do, yes. If people are prepared to pay for high, right? This is a killer app for broadband. And I think to me, it was a kind of an interesting insight to realize that many times, okay, what it requires is this level of understanding of what those things, how those things are seen, perceived, and right, and articulated internally. I think the third process that I'm highlighting here is this idea of matchmaking. And what do I mean by matchmaking? I think the big difference between people who can convey information, translated or not translated, and someone who can do the matchmaking is matchmaking means it's not only that you bring in information inside the organization, but you can pinpoint to whom exactly it matters. A lot of the loss in translation in this corporate startup is typically, if you are anyone from a startup here, so you are the type of people, right, that you do everything, right? You are CFO, CEO, CTO, you name it, right? You're gonna go and talk to a large corporation, okay? There are 200 people working with the CFO, and you have to figure out which one among the 200 that really matters, right? And it's a very different world, because in a startup world, you understand, you see the holistic picture. You go and talk to a large organization, very few people understand what's happening globally. So a lot of the job of a boundary spanner is to figure out, okay, if I'm talking to this startup, who in Visa could be interested in this, okay? It's not only that I saw the two things, I can be a channel. It's not only that I can translate and say, no, how do I put this in Visa's language? But also, who exactly this could be relevant to? And the fourth point here is this idea that a lot of the really value-added work that a boundary spanner can do is what they call transforming. And transforming is the following. Is when you reach a point that you understand the organization to the point that people say, we need this technology, and you can go back and say, no, actually, I don't think you need that technology. Okay, so from what I'm seeing in Silicon Valley, or from what I'm seeing, right, in Seoul, if your problem is X, actually what you need is Y. So is an ability of transforming not a solution, but transforming the requirement, transforming the needs. So what I'm trying to suggest to you here is, as much as kind of this idea of open innovation is a big promise, right? And as much as the opportunities for connection are there, if you don't have people that understand their job and understand all those processes that have to be in place, what is very likely to happen is that things will die somewhere, okay? So you know that, right? The valley of death of innovation, right? There's the same valley of death of open innovation, okay? But I don't want to leave you with a kind of a negative view on this. So let me tell you what I believe, right? Not believe, what my research shows that what those people have to have, okay? So what do you need to have to do this successfully? Have you heard about the expression social capital? What is social capital? Any definition that you have in mind? Okay, networks. But why would say social capital? What it means? You get favors, okay? Other definitions of social capital, right? And I think it's very intuitive to us. And what I'll propose is kind of how do you break down social capital in different dimensions? But let me hear more. So, you get information, goodwill, influence. Sorry? Trust. But how do you build social capital? You add value to other people. Yeah, I mean, it's very important, right? Because if the word capital is there, it's something valuable, right? To say, though, is like an asset. What I'd like to suggest to you is there is a way of breaking down social capital in 3 dimensions. Okay? There is cognitive social capital, meaning we have shared experience together that I can understand how you think. I can put what I'm seeing in words that you can understand. By the way, when you guys do a program together, you do the MBA together or executive education program together, a lot of the feeling that you have with your peers is, now we have the same language, right? We all went to the same class. So, and that's really the cognitive social capital. You have that capital with other people that you know that you can talk to them in a language that they understand. I think there's some social capital which is related to the structure. Where I am in a position that I can see different networks, okay? I can make different connections. I can, they say, I can create goodwill because my position, my structure allow me to do that. So many times people have social capital just because where they sit in the organization, okay? Or because you are a board member of this company, or okay, there's something related to structure. And I think the third element is what I'm calling here relations. And that's why you talk about trust. Okay, another element of social capital is it's not only that we can speak the same language, we have shared things together. I can put those things in words that you understand. It's not only that I am in a position that I can help you because my structure allows me to, but also over time, we developed something which is really, really important, which is this level of trust that if I pick the phone and I call you and say, no, you have to see company X, you're going to see company X, okay? Because you really trust that I'm really trying to help you, or I'm really trying. So I think what is interesting doing this research, and I was telling you I spent kind of a number of years talking to a lot of those guys, is to see that the very successful ones are people who were able to develop those different dimensions of social capital. It's also just for you to think about the sequence of that. Many times, just being in a place, if you're working in the open innovation area, if you're going to work in a specific ecosystem, if you're working, I don't know, for one part of the government that related to this, you make structural capital very quickly. Okay? I think the second one is really how do you build a cognitive social capital. You have developed those shared meanings, common ground. And I think really the one that takes longer is how do you create those relations. So I think what's interesting to me is both for you, as you say, how can I play that role of a boundary spanner in my organization, but also as you're dealing with other people in other organizations, one question that I would encourage you to ask is, say, do you think, does that person have social capital internally? Okay? Because imagine you're trying to connect with Visa with someone and say, no, does that person have social capital? Because if that person does not, it's very likely that things will not go through, okay? So it's more like, I'm trying to share with you what I believe are the capabilities that a boundary spanner should have. So I will kind of present this slide and then open for questions about this or other things. To me, I believe that collaboration, between startups and corporates are essential for both. Okay, they have complementary assets. I believe that the more we think about the digital world, the more this is going to be important. I also believe, that would be a very naive view of the world that you imagine, just because people have complementary assets, let me put them together. Let's have a tech talk and have some nice kind of appetizers, and people will immediately connect. Okay, this is not the way it works. It's understanding what are the barriers that are likely to happen, and understanding the nature. So my suggestion first to you is, is the problem an issue of access? Is how can we get better connected? How do we put an outpost here or there? Versus is an action that I'm getting a lot of leads. The problem is that I don't do anything with it. Okay, my experience that most of the case, especially for companies which have a lot of resources, is not about access, it's about action. The second takeaway I'd like you to remember is whenever you are identifying that barrier, trying to understand what's blocking, try to understand if it is an issue of ability or motivation, okay? What do I mean by that is, if it is a cognitive, people don't understand it, train people, okay? Educate, right? It is resolving an ability problem. If it's an issue of motivations, because people are not convinced, the solution is completely different, okay? It's not about educating, it's about changing incentives, right? Or changing people, okay? Do you know Burger King? No, Burger, you guys know, right? Is there any Brazilian in the room? So for the Brazilians, right, you know, Burger King is owned, right, by this group of Brazilian private equity investors called 3G. And I was with the CEO of Burger King, and I mean, one thing that he said along this, you know, because they come with a very specific culture, is, you know, people really have to be motivated to work. Like they say, we change the people, or we change the people, okay? So either people change the way they are, or they change the people, okay? So we change the people, or we change the people. But it's very important to see, right, that completely different types of blocks if it's ability or it's motivation. I think that role of a boundary spanner is a very important role. I believe that many of you, by the mere reason you are here and connected here, I believe that many of you are already playing boundary spanning in one way or another, right? Crossing boundaries, organizational boundaries, intellectual boundaries, geographic boundaries. And I would kind of remind you of this, how important, okay, is social capital. And I think it's very intuitive. Everybody says, you know, is this goodwill? But also go on one step further and say, you know, am I developing social capital in the 3 dimensions? It's because where I'm sitting in the organization, is because I understand things. It is the cognitive social capital. It's really not about cognition or structure. It's really about the relations that I have. I appreciate that 7 o'clock on which day is today? Wednesday. I'm giving you a lot to digest. So in addition to just hearing what I'm saying, I am circulating an article that I published about this, okay, talking about those processes. If any of you is, what I'm giving you is kind of, is the instant knowledge digested, right, version of this in 3 pages. If any of you is really, really interested, I have the full academic 3 pages explanation for what I was showing. I will kind of, we have some time for questions.
So we have more than half an hour for Q&A, but...
Hi, thank you. Hi, Susie again. Thanks for being patient. And thank you for really structuring the kind of thinking and approach and people that work well in this space. So I'm going to ask 2 questions, actually. The first is,
Please.
In the research that you've done, which kind of companies stand out the most to you as being most successful in this space, taking the kind of structure that you've looked at? And secondly, it's a sort of consideration. I've spent the last sort of 20 years a bit between the startup space and the corporate space. And what strikes me is there's a very different approach and attitude, obviously. The startups fail fast, right, and learn quick. Corporates don't want to fail at all. So that, and then they've got their processes, their risk assessments, their guidelines, all of these things that startups then bulk at. So that can create conflict a lot of the time. So what is your thinking around addressing that difference of approach?
Okay, thank you. So first question in terms of, as you look at companies, which companies which are doing this well? I would say, okay, that if you take the pharma sector, telecommunications, fast-moving consumer goods, right? You could name, right, like the Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson's, right, Merck and British Telecom. And, I think to me, they started first too, okay? So what is interesting to me, as you look, you can go and say, who was forced to start the journey first? And I think the industries which had a major transformation, and for example, what we see in many industries now, telcos and pharmas, they experienced this a long time ago. They had to start that process earlier. So I think it's a good place to look and say, no, those guys have been doing this. For example, BT, they started doing this in 2000. Okay? So you have 15 years of history. I just wrote, so a long time ago, in 2006, I wrote the first case on BT and how they're doing this. And last year, right, 12 years later, I wrote a second one. And you can see, right, the learning, what it means, okay, to have done this for all those years. So I think I would go for that experience. With one caveat, I think the major challenge for all of them is still today is how do you do this globally? I think a lot of them, or many of them, managed to nail, I nailed Silicon Valley. I know how to do this in Silicon Valley. Scaling up that process in different parts of the world is very difficult. Okay? So how do you do this? Because a lot of the things that we can say here, how do you develop social capital? How do you understand different kind of codes? How you can, a lot of those are very context specific. So many times you manage to do this in one location. How do you manage to now deploy this globally is very tough. So I would say you can go and see some companies which are far ahead, but I don't see that as a dominant design. It's, people nailed and this is it, especially on a global level. I think the disconnection between the startups and the corporates in terms of mindset, I think it is a major issue because that reflects also on speed. Okay, so many times it's just kind of corporates cannot do things as the speed that startups work. What I believe, what has to change is the corporate. Okay, so I mean, and it would be also naive to imagine that the whole corporate would change. So what I see a lot of those boundary spanners doing, and I will talk about the matchmaking. Many times the matchmaking is also finding who within that large organization has an entrepreneurial mindset. Okay, I know that I can knock on 10 doors, maybe 9 of them, those guys will take forever, process, okay, approve, 10 people have to approve this and sign and come back. But maybe there's one crazy guy there that's gonna say, yes, okay, let's go, okay? So I think a lot of this kind of job of the matchmaking is also finding people inside the corporate who have, right, a smaller gap with the startup. For example, when I wrote a case about Merck, right, the pharma company, it was clear, okay, that the challenge there was kind of the difference of speed between a biotech and a pharma company is simply too much. Okay, biotech cannot wait what the pharma companies go through. So you have to find, right, which areas within the organization might be more agile. Other questions?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Felipe. My name is Awad. I'm a Gemba 17 graduate, and I'm also attending a workshop tomorrow. By career, I'm an entrepreneur. I have a prop tech venture called RealX.
You have which kind of venture?
Property technology venture.
Okay.
And I think the message you just passed along is very relevant because we are witnessing this situation, right? We're going to corporates, and then we go to accelerators, and we're also going to academia. How much role do either of these play as spanners? And then what role does government as a policymaker have in actually making this effective?
So I can see, I mean, 2 roles there, right? Many times what you need to do is create a platform so people is providing that structural platform that people can talk and start creating, right, the social capital together. So for example, think about the role of a business school. And for you, which program you did was the Gemba, right? So you went to INSEAD. How many months? 18? 14, right? 14 months. What is the role of INSEAD in making connection happen, right? One of it can be, we create a language. You take, I don't know, a strategy class, and after that, you all understand what blue ocean means, and right, and you see the world via blue ocean language, whatever. So there's some role, right, of some of those players in how can we create a common language with people from different parts of the world, startups, corporate, they can talk. But also, I think creating the forum that people can interact, and I think governments can do this as well. I think it can go a long way because a lot of that disconnection that many people, right, that corporates many times have with startups is simply because they don't understand each other. They don't interact, right? They are not together. So I think, right, what we need to be able to do is, can we create those multidisciplinary, multi-agent type of forum that people, right, that I can understand what it means to be in a startup, you understand what it means to be in academia, we understand what it means to be in a large corporate. So I think this is right. We could not take for granted how important it is to create a forum. Yeah, you know, and I believe if you go back, so think about, I mean, how INSEAD was created. Do you remember anything? Why INSEAD was created? Yeah, so the guys came from, right, a few professors from Harvard came to Europe. At which time in history? Do you remember that? After World War II. What was the goal? What they wanted to do? Right, they wanted to create via business, right? Make people that were not talking to each other, right? Post-war Europe, make them speak the same language, okay? Let's make sure that the Germans talking again to the French, talking again to the Italians, to the British, okay? And as I look about the challenge that we have in terms of, right, the digital world, I'm increasingly convinced, okay, that this idea of how do you make people who speak different languages talk is really critical. Okay? So now the problem is not a post-war. It's not how we make the Germans talk again to the French. Might well be the challenge is how do you make, right, the startup understand what it means to be a corporate, what it mean, okay, and not each of those sectors grow in isolation. Other question?
Hi, my name is Dhanush. I work in private equity here. And one of the key roles that we play is actually doing bolt-on M&A for our portfolio companies. And I didn't think that I can rephrase my title as a boundary spanner, but, it's a lot of what we actually do in practical day-to-day, working life. One of the challenges that we face, we understand the company, we know what the internal limitations are. We have a network, we build networks, we build trust. You find ideas that can work, that can plug into the company and work really well. But as a boundary spanner, where do you stop and where do you hand over the mantle? That's like it's a fine art, but like in your experience, can you throw some light into
Excellent
this?
question. So let me try to divide this big question in at least two segments. I think the first one is, when do you stop? Many times you should also stop before things happen. Meaning, if you realize that making a connection will not go anywhere, you should better not make the connection now to preserve your social capital. So it's interesting, okay, because you say, no, my role is to be a boundary spanner, so I should be always, no, you should not always be connected, right? Many times, for example, when you talk to those guys in the Valley, right, so they say many times they created social capital by, you come in and ask me to do something with my company, and I say, no, my company is not ready yet for that, okay? Let's keep in touch, let's keep on standby, but let me stop right here, okay? Because if I try to bring this now, this is gonna die, and so this almost is protecting for later, right? The not yet. I think it's a very important role that boundary spanners do. And I think the second one is, and actually it's interesting that you're asking this because that's what I'm working right now in terms of research, is looking, once you brought the idea inside, okay, how much the boundary spanners should continue and be involved until the product launch. And I can tell you two things, okay? That teams that have a boundary spanning involved until the end are much more likely to succeed. And two, teams that manage to create a boundary object, a prototype, something that people can start playing with it. Because many times, the boundary object, the prototype, it is the way that different people can articulate something that everybody sees. Because I had an idea, I thought that we were speaking the same language, but actually we're not, okay? So I think it's very interesting because what my research shows on this is the boundary spanner should be involved much longer. It's not just making the initial connection should stay longer, but also it's not only the person, but also how do you create those prototypes, those objects, things that to materialize that can be, right, something that everybody can refer to.
Any other questions? All right, then, yeah, we have.
Please.
Hi, My name is Saad. Thank you, Dr. Philippe. It was a very interesting talk. I know most of your work, I think, has to do with Western markets like Silicon Valley and things. But I was just wondering if you think there are any unique challenges for like new emerging markets like China or something.
Yeah, so I think, and I mean, for those of you who will be tomorrow in the workshop, right? One of my assignment questions to you was, can you do this in the Middle East? It is clear that there are a number of things which are involved here that you need to adapt. I think the first one is simply geographic dispersion. Okay, to what extent things are concentrated or not concentrated. Okay? And so, a lot of the ability of doing this in a cluster like Silicon Valley is everything's very concentrated. Also, the development of the VC community, okay, is very strong. Also, you have some universities there which are not as good as INSEAD, but you can say that Stanford and Berkeley and Caltech, these are reasonable, right? Reasonable universities. Also, you have people who have a lot of mobility, okay? You know that California courts typically don't enforce non-compete. So you see, right? Google moving into Microsoft, right? A lot of mobility. What I'm trying to convey is the message is, you need to have all those elements in place, okay? A place becomes a cluster. It's not because you have just one of it, okay? It's this self-reinforcing mechanism that, I think this said, I think for me what's the big opportunity is for places, right, like Abu Dhabi, right, or São Paulo or Shanghai, is that they can see what worked or did not work, and they can leapfrog. You don't have to go to the same trajectory of those, right? You can look and say, okay, how things will look like, and you try, right, start to design things already with the next one. So I think it is definitely more difficult. I think even the most kind of resourceful organizations doing this, right, in Asia, in Middle East, in Latin America, it is not the same thing as Silicon Valley. At the same time, I see a number of interesting initiatives, okay, of seeing how certain places can really leapfrog and come up with a completely different one. So for those of you, I mean, the majority of you will not be here tomorrow again. So I wrote a case on a company from Dubai called Fashion Forward Dubai. I mean, have you heard about this company? And I think that the interesting story there, right, is also how do you, if you want to be a cluster in fashion, do you replicate, right, Paris, Milan, New York, right? Or do you try to come up with something completely different already? So I think, you know, the challenges are there, but so are the opportunities, especially if you have this forward-looking mindset.
All right. Well, I think everyone's a bit tired after a long day. So big round of applause for Professor Felipe.
Thank you. So two things. Thank you, Pascal, and thank you all.